July, 1879, Tennessee Territory. Appalachian Edge. The wind stirred low across the holler, rustling tall grass and clover in hushed whispers, as if the land itself was afraid to speak too loud. Eliza Morgan stood barefoot at the edge of the creek, her hem soaked and stained, her copper-red hair unbound and glinting beneath the dying sun. A raven circled overhead. An old Maudie Bell who ran the general store and whispered into every ear in town had already claimed that the black-feathered bird was a sign. That girl's touched by dark things, she'd hissed. A curse lives in her womb. Eliza's fingertips brushed the river reeds as she knelt and cupped water to her lips, the coolness shocking against the heat in her skin. She had come here for peace, but there was none left. Not after last night. Not after the preacher's wife collapsed during the revival and someone shouted Eliza's name. She looked right at her and dropped like thunder. A boy claimed, didn't blink once. That was all it took. Again, now even her father, the old trapper who once built her a cradle from cedar and sang Cherokee lullabies in his whiskey-sweet voice, wouldn't meet her gaze. He sat by the fire chewing tobacco, spitting into the dirt, pretending she'd never been born. Mama had died in childbirth, a fact the town clutched like gospel, and the midwife, red-faced and breathless, had emerged from their cabin crying. Still no cry, no sound. The mother's gone, and the babe's cursed quiet. Eliza had survived, silent for the first 2 years of her life. By now, it didn't matter that she spoke plain, walked upright, or fed the widow Miller every Sunday without fail. All they saw was the girl whose shadow made men stumble and whose glance left crops withering. She'd kissed one boy once, Lemmy Harrow, son of the blacksmith, and 3 weeks later, he broke his leg falling off a roof. They called it judgment. Eliza called it bad balance. Still, word spread. She straightened now, drying her hands on her apron. Behind her, the sound of hooves stirred dust from the trail. She turned slowly, already knowing the shape of the man coming down the ridge. Broad-shouldered, beard thick, boots worn to the bone, her uncle. Emery hits. Reverend Clayton, Eliza Jean, he said, stopping just short of her. She dipped her head. Uncle Clay. He dismounted and walked his horse close enough to cast her in shadow. Your pa asked me to come. He says he can't keep protecting you. The town council met this morning. Her lips parted. They want me gone. Clayton hesitated, then nodded. Before the full moon. They say a Cherokee trader passed through Deer Hollow last week. Name of Sonny. He's offered peace in exchange for taking you. Says he needs a wife, says it plain. Bold as scripture. Eliza laughed bitter and hollow. I'm to be traded off like a sack of flour. Clayton winced. He's not just any man. Eliza, he's a chief's son. Respected. Wishkin. And you, Ryra, some. You'd be safe. Soft fool. She snapped. What about choice? What about my say? You've been marked since birth, he said gently. If you stay, they'll burn your cabin down before the season turns. Her breath caught. Behind her, the creek babbled like a lullaby she used to believe in. I'm not broken. She whispered. Nah, he agreed. But they think you are. That night, Eliza stood in front of the only home she'd ever known, one-roomed, chimney cracked. Daisy vines curling up the posts. She ran her fingers along the doorframe, remembering how her mother once tied a red ribbon there to ward off spirits. It had faded to pink before unraveling in the wind. Her father didn't come to the threshold to say goodbye. He stared into the fire, bottle in hand. At dawn, the wagon came. Sonny was not what she expected. He rode up quiet, with no fanfare, no gun at his hip, no smoke trailing behind. Tall, shoulders squared, eyes like storm-washed stone. He dismounted and looked her over with no hunger, no pity, only recognition, as if he already knew her. Eliza, he said, his voice deep, wrapped in low thunder. She didn't answer. I don't take prisoners, he added. I'm not a gift, she replied. His gaze held hers. Then come by your own will. Silence stretched between them, taut as rope. Then she climbed into the wagon. Not because she wanted to, but because no one else had offered her a choice. Not until now. They traveled for 2 days, through thicket and pine, into land that pulsed with old memory. The trees grew dense here, older than her grandmother's stories. Sonny spoke little, but his presence filled the space between words. He moved like someone with nothing to prove, nothing to fear. On the third night, They camped beneath a split cedar, the fire casting golden light onto his carved bone pendant. Eliza sat across from him, arms wrapped around her knees. "You don't ask questions," she said. "I listen." He answered. "To what?" "To the truth in silence." She studied him. "You believe the stories. That I'm cursed." He leaned back, arms crossed. "I believe people fear what they don't understand." "And you don't?" His eyes met hers. "I've met spirits. They don't wear your face." For the first time in weeks, her breath didn't hitch in fear. She nodded once. By the time they reached the Cherokee camp, her heart no longer beat wild in her chest. Children ran barefoot between hides stretched for drying. Women scraped bark for medicine. Old men sat cross-legged around a stone circle. The air smelled of sage, pinot, and cedar smoke. She stepped down from the wagon. Unsure, the camp quieted. Sani placed a hand on her shoulder. "Not possession, not command, but grounding. She is my guest," he announced, "and my intended." A murmur rippled like wind through grass. One elder stepped forward, his braids streaked with white. "She is not of us. She stood when others ran." Sani replied, "She has known exile since birth. That makes her kin. Den eight peri." The elder studied Eliza, his eyes sharp. Then he nodded once and walked away. Sani turned to her. "You'll sleep in my lodge. No vows. Not until you ask them yourself." Eliza exhaled. It felt, for the first time, like breath. That night, sleep didn't come easily. She lay on furs softer than anything she'd known, the smell of smoked meat and cedar filling the space. Her fingers brushed the carved flute Sani left by her bed. She didn't ask its meaning, but she held it close. And outside, a raven called once from the trees, no omen, just a witness. Tomorrow, she would learn to walk this new world. But tonight, she rested. And for the first time in 22 years, she did not dream of fire. Tennessee Territory, 1879. The same red moon that had once bathed Eliza Morgan in shame now rose above a different sky, fat and swollen like a wound that refused to heal. It hung over the distant hills like a judge and jury, its light washing the earth in a dull, rust-colored glow. The wagon creaked and groaned beneath her as it rattled along the narrow dirt trail snaking through the edge of the forest. Eliza sat hunched in the back, wrists bound by fraying hemp rope, her once white dress now streaked with mud and old blood. The scent of horses and sweat filled her nostrils, mingling with the ache in her stomach and the heaviness in her chest. Her father, Jedediah Morgan, sat at the front of the wagon seat with Reverend Horace Cobb beside him, both men silent. Grim the Reverend's hat was drawn low, shadowing a face lined with conviction and something colder still. He had been the one to suggest the exchange. Cloaking the arrangement in righteousness, her father hadn't hesitated. "She's cursed," Jedediah had whispered, eyes glassy from corn liquor, as if repeating a line from scripture. "Let the Cherokee have her. But perhaps they'll know what to do with a barren woman touched by sin." Eliza's teeth clenched, biting down the sob that burned in her throat. She had begged, had fallen to her knees at her father's boots, but mercy was not something he had in him. Not for a girl who bled at the wrong times, who spoke to birds and wrote stories by candlelight. Not for a daughter who had once been caught bearing a dead rabbit with reverence, whispering over it like it was a soul that mattered. "You'll be delivered at moonrise," Reverend Cobb had declared. Hand resting on the Bible, he twisted like a blade. "And you'll accept your fate without question." They had tied her wrists with scripture and shame. And now we know. Every jolt of the wagon sent splinters through her spine. She could not cry. Her tears had dried up miles ago, leaving only salt behind. She could only stare through the slit in the canvas and watch the land change. The trees here were tall and tightly packed, their trunks pale and their roots coiled like secrets. The silence was thick. Not even the insects dared to chirp. Suddenly, the wagon slowed. Jedediah pulled the reins taut, and the horses whinnied softly, stamping the ground. The trail opened into a small clearing, encircled by tall pines and shadowed ridges. A campfire burned low at the center, its smoke rising in a lazy column. Shapes moved in the gloom, men on foot, others on horseback, all with the quiet, deliberate posture of hunters or ghosts. From the trees stepped a man. Eliza straightened, heart hammering. He walked with a kind of ease that came from knowing the land beneath your boots would never betray you. His chest was bare, save for leather straps that crisscrossed over his shoulders, a necklace of carved bone resting above his collarbone. His dark hair was tied back in a thick braid that fell between his shoulder blades. And though he carried no rifle, no knife she could see, there was something in the set of his jaw and the stillness in his eyes that told her he needed none. This was Sani. Jedediah stood, his boots hitting the dirt with a dull thud. Eliza couldn't see his face, but she heard the rustle of parchment, the treaty, the bargain, the price of her life. She's yours now, her father said, voice clipped and sharp. You give your people peace from our land, and you take her off mine. No ceremony, no apology, no farewell. Sani did not look at Jedediah. His gaze rested solely on Eliza, not with hunger, not even with pity, but with something that made her spine straighten in defiance. Curiosity. What is her crime? He asked in low, precise English. Jedediah's mouth twitched. She was born cursed. Her womb is empty. She speaks to the wind. She dreams strange dreams. She is unclean. Sani's jaw tightened. He looked at Reverend Cobb. And what do you call this? He asked, lifting the parchment from Jedediah's hands. A covenant, the Reverend replied, to keep the peace. Sani studied the document as if it were something rotten. Then he looked again at Eliza, at the bruises on her wrists, the mud on her hem, the stubborn tilt of her chin despite everything. At last, he nodded once. Slow, I accept her, he said. Jedediah turned without another word. The Reverend spat at the fire and followed. Eliza stared as the wagon wheels began to turn again, carrying away the last of her blood ties. Then she looked up. Sani had not moved. He held the parchment in one hand, but his eyes remained locked on her. Finally, he stepped forward and, without ceremony, sliced the rope at her wrist with a knife she hadn't seen him draw. You are free now. He said simply. Eliza rubbed her wrists. Not speaking, her throat was dry. Her heart pounded. I wasn't given a choice, she said. You have one now. She blinked. Sani turned and gestured to the camp beyond the trees. A few figures moved in the shadows, watchful, reserved. He did not force her to follow, but he also didn't wait. He walked ahead. Slow, sure-footed. And after a moment, because there was nowhere else, because the moon was still red and she had survived, Eliza followed. The Cherokee camp was quiet, almost reverent. It stood beside a rushing river that glowed like mercury in the moonlight. Several lodges made from curved saplings and bark stood in a circle. Each fire banked low. Children slept. Elders whispered in a language she didn't yet understand. Sani led her to a small tent near the edge of the camp, beside a cedar tree. It was not grand. A blanket had been laid out on the earth floor. A small bowl of water sat beside it. A piece of carved wood, perhaps a flute, rested atop a stack of folded hides. You will stay here, he said. No one will touch you, not unless you ask them to. Eliza hesitated. Why are you being kind to me? Sani's eyes met hers across the small space. Because someone wasn't, he turned to leave, but paused at the flap. You are not what they say. Eliza Morgan, he added quietly. They were afraid of your voice, not your silence. And then he was gone, alone in the dim light. Eliza sat down on the blanket and buried her face in her hands. The silence was different here. Not suffocating, not accusing, just still. She had been traded like livestock, cast away like refuse. But somehow, in this strange place, her breath came easier, outside. The blood moon slipped behind the ridge, casting the camp in silver shadow. Eliza lay back and watched the fireflies blink against the canvas. Her body ached. Her heart felt like a raw nerve. But for the first time in her life, she did not feel cursed. She just felt alive. The morning broke gently over the hills of the Tennessee Territory, casting warm amber light over the folds of mist that clung to the trees like forgotten dreams. Eliza woke not to fear, but to the sound of quiet murmurs outside the lodge, and the soft rustling of leaves touched by the breeze. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, her body wasn't bracing for another blow. There was only quiet, strange, and tentative, but not empty. She sat up slowly on the bed of woven mats. The night's heaviness still clung to her bones, but the warmth of the furs and the scent of cedar reminded her she was not in the Morgan farmhouse anymore. She was in Sani's camp, and no one had screamed. No one had cursed her. No one had tried to cleanse her with salt or scripture or the fire poker her uncle once held too close to her cheek. through the slit in the hide flap. Sunlight danced like gold through the branches. The shadows moved with it, shadows she'd feared, but now watched like old sentries. She rose, wrapped a deerskin shawl around her shoulders, and stepped outside into the fresh scent of morning wood smoke and pine. The camp was alive in quiet rhythm. Children darted between tents, their laughter echoing against the trunks of ancient oaks. Women stirred pots over low fires or twisted sinew into thread. Men hauled water or shaped arrows. It was ordinary and beautiful and entirely foreign. Then she saw him. Sani stood beside a half-built corral, shirtless under the morning sun, sweat already glistening on his shoulders as he dragged a beam into place. His arms flexed with strength, but his movements were smooth controlled like a man used to wielding power with purpose, not for pain. He noticed her watching but didn't smile, didn't gawk. He just dipped his head slightly in acknowledgement and returned to his task. It was that calm presence again, like a tree that had weathered storms and stood without need to explain itself. Eliza's heart fluttered not with romance, but with confusion. This was not what she expected, not what she'd been told to expect from a savage. But then again, everything she'd been told had been soaked in the hatred of fearful men. A gentle voice pulled her attention away. "Would you like water?" A girl no older than 16 stood beside her, holding a carved gourd filled with cool creek water. Her eyes were almond-shaped. Curious, but not unkind. Eliza hesitated before nodding. "Yes, thank you." The girl smiled shyly and handed it over. "My name is Ayoka. Sani said you might need help." Eliza sipped the water slowly. It tasted pure, not metallic like the pumps back home, not like the water her aunt insisted needed boiling and lye to be clean. I don't know how to help," Eliza admitted, eyes dropping to her raw hands. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do here." Ayoka tilted her head. "You're not supposed to do anything. Eliza, you are safe now." "That's enough." Those words caught in Eliza's throat like a splinter. Safe. That word had always been conditional. Fragile, certain. One misstep, one ill-timed glance, one cracked plate and safety vanished. But here, Ayoka seemed to mean it. The girl gestured toward the woven circle where several women were twisting reeds into baskets and laughing softly. "You can sit with us, if you'd like." Eliza nodded and followed. She sat under the shade of a cedar tree, surrounded by women whose language slipped into songs and shared stories she could only half understand. But they didn't speak over her. They didn't sneer. One woman handed her a bundle of sweetgrass, showing her slowly how to braid it. By the time the sun climbed high, Eliza's fingers ached, but in a way that felt honest, not from bruises or labor born of punishment, but from work that created something. She had made something, a braid of grass. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Sani appeared near midday. He crouched beside the circle, nodding politely to the women before addressing her. "Eliza," he said softly, "will you walk with me?" The women exchanged brief glances but said nothing. One smiled knowingly. Eliza swallowed and stood, brushing dust from her skirts. "Of course, son maintamoison." They walked without speaking for several minutes, the camp falling behind them as the forest deepened. Sunlight fractured through the branches in golden shafts. A woodpecker knocked rhythmically somewhere to the west. "I want to show you something," he said. She nodded, still not trusting her voice. He led her to a small clearing where the earth had been disturbed. A series of flat stones circled a low mound of soil, and at its center, a single sprig of wild rosemary grew. Eliza looked to him for meaning. "This is where I buried my sister," Sani said after a moment. His voice did not tremble. 3 winters ago, she died of fever, brought by settlers who wanted our land and left sickness in their wake. Eliza inhaled sharply. "I'm sorry." He nodded. "You remind me of her, not your face or voice. Your eyes, Miss Monts. The way they hold too much pain for someone so young." She looked away, not sure how to carry that. "I did not agree to take you because I wanted a wife," he said next, his voice like gravel smoothed by time. "I agreed because I saw your father's shame and your silence. You were not a gift. You were thrown away." Eliza's lip trembled. "And you picked me up." He turned to face her fully. "No." I stood still. "You're the one who chose to rise." She couldn't hold his gaze. Not yet. The knot in her throat was too tight. But something cracked within her, a shell long formed around grief. "I don't know how to be someone here," she whispered. "You already are someone." He said simply, "You survived." "That's enough." Got no words upon. They stood in silence for a long time. No birdsong, just wind and memory and the first glimmer of healing. That evening, the camp gathered for a shared meal beneath the stars. A fire crackled in the center of the circle, and bowls passed from hand to hand. Venison stew, roasted squash, pine nut bread. Eliza sat between Ayoka and Sani, her shoulders still tense, but her breath less shallow. Someone began drumming, a slow, steady beat like a heartbeat in the earth. Sani leaned closer. Tonight, they drum for the ancestors, for those lost, and those who remain in Surinamons, Suriyuri, Tirum. She looked around, absorbing the glow on every face. There was no ceremony for her, no formal acceptance, just presence, just place. At one point, a small boy crawled into her lap, sleepy and sticky with berry juice. He looked up at her without suspicion, just trust. Eliza blinked away tears and held him. When the drumming stopped and the stars deepened, Sani stood. His voice was low, but the camp hushed to hear it. This woman came here not by choice, but by fate. She has been judged by others for curses they could not see, for wounds they could not bear to witness. But I say this now, she is not cursed. She is sacred. She is under my protection, and in time, I hope, she will walk beside me of her own choosing. The words fell like a stone into a still pond. No cheers, no debate, just silence that honored truth. Eliza looked up at him. His expression was unreadable but open. Waiting, he wasn't demanding her choice. He was offering a future. For now. None affirmative. She wasn't ready to take his hand, but she didn't step away either. And that, what Tinikin was for tonight, was everything. The days that followed Eliza's arrival in the Cherokee camp passed with the uneasy quiet of a hearth fire that had not yet decided whether to warm or consume. Whispers followed her like a second shadow. At first light, when she stepped out of Sani's lodge, the older women paused their weaving and stared, hands frozen in the middle of tying knots. Children hushed as she walked past. Men lowered their voices when they saw her coming. The air was thick with watchfulness, not overt hostility, but not welcome either. In their eyes, it during Kuranetserban Onarn. She saw the questions she dared not ask aloud. What is she doing here? Why would Sani bring her into the circle? Eliza bore their stares with her chin high, but inside, each glance cut. Sani had left early every morning since she arrived, tending to duties she didn't yet understand. He said little but always brought her something, a bundle of cedar for the fire, a pouch of dried berries, a carved spoon shaped like a bird in flight. The silence between them wasn't cold, it was cautious, like two people standing on opposite banks of a river, not yet brave enough to build a bridge. That morning, clouds hung low in the Tennessee sky, dark and heavy, the kind that whispered of rain long before it came. Eliza sat outside the lodge, gently combing her fingers through her damp hair, her eyes scanning the distant hills. The pine trees bent with the breeze, and somewhere a hawk cried overhead. Behind her, the lodge flap rustled. Sani stepped out, tall and still, as if the wind bent around him but never dared touch him. His gaze swept over the camp, then settled on her. In his hand, he held something long and slender, an object wrapped in deerskin. He approached and offered it to her without a word. "What is it?" "Weedamarn," she asked softly, her fingers brushing his as she took it. "Ibawawanas," he said, "for your hands, so you can feel what strength feels like." She unwrapped it slowly. The wood was polished and dark, curved with perfect balance, simple. Beautiful. Eliza blinked. "I don't know how to use this," she admitted. Sani shrugged slightly, his tone even. "You will?" We all begin not knowing, but even the wind learns the direction of the trees. Eliza looked down at the bow again, then back at him. "You made this, I shaped it." The wood was already waiting to become. Her chest tightened at the quiet poetry of his words. There was something about him, a stillness that drew her in. She was used to men who barked and cursed, who drank until they forgot her name. Sani was different. When he looked at her, it was not with hunger or shame. It was as if he was still deciding whether to believe in her, and that was more powerful than any kindness. Later that afternoon, the skies broke open. The rain came suddenly, hard and cold, drumming against the earth with the force of judgment. The wind howled down the ridge and swept through the village, lifting cooking pots and tearing at clothes hung on lines. Children shrieked and ran. Women hurried to gather food and cover fires. The storm had not asked permission. Eliza helped where she could, rushing to the aid of an old woman whose basket had spilled its contents across the mud. Her hands worked without hesitation, gathering, lifting, fetching dry cloth. Some stared at her with surprise, others looked away, not yet ready to see her as anything but a curse brought into their midst. By the time she returned to Sandy's lodge, soaked and breathless, her hair clung to her skin and mud painted the hem of her dress. The fire inside sputtered in protest, nearly drowned by the wind that had crept in under the seams of the hide walls. She knelt beside it, teeth chattering. Then, the flap lifted again. Sonny entered, soaked as well, his dark hair slicked to his face. His tunic was streaked with water and pine needles, but his presence filled the small space like calm in a storm. He saw her crouch by the fire and moved to her side. "You were out in that?" he asked, voice soft but stern. "I couldn't just stand and do nothing." He stared at her for a long moment. Then he knelt beside her. Reaching into a pouch at his waist, he took out a bundle of dry moss, flint, and a shard of steel. "Movi waved mayo waffen," he said gently, nodding to the fire pit. She shifted, and he struck the flint expertly. Sparks danced into the moss, which he fed carefully into the damp coals until flame licked up again. Slow and steady, he leaned back, satisfied, and wiped his hands on his tunic. "You saved the fire," she murmured. He glanced sideways at her. "No, I reminded it how to burn." They sat in silence for a while, only the crackle of the fire and the soft hiss of rain on the roof above them. Then, Hatipirin, without looking at her, he spoke. "Ping. Do you know why they fear you?" Eliza hesitated. "Because I was cursed." Sonny's jaw tightened. "That's what they say, but that's not why." "Then why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because you remind them of things they wish to forget. Ain wefurnam, betrayal, the way promises can rot into lies." Her throat closed. He was right. She had been all those things once. To some, maybe she still was, but you did not ask to carry those memories. He added, "And you are not the one who made them." She looked at him, startled by the quiet rage in his voice, not at her, but at the world that had broken her. "You don't believe I'm cursed?" she asked. Sonny turned to her fully now. His eyes, dark and unreadable, searched hers. "I believe curses are things men invent to explain away their fear. You are not cursed. You were thrown away." That broke something in her. Tears welled in her eyes. She blinked them back, but one slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. Sonny didn't flinch. He reached out and caught the tear with his thumb, his touch feather light. "Here, you are not thrown," he said. "Here, you are seen in me." The next morning, the rain was gone. The camp steamed under the sun, earth damp and soft. Everything smelled of pine and river water. Life stirred again, but something had shifted. As Eliza walked through the village, carrying a basket of kindling Sandy had asked her to fetch, she noticed the glances again, but now they lingered a moment longer. A child smiled at her and waved. An old woman gestured for her to bring the wood closer to her own fire. She obeyed, wordlessly. When she placed the sticks beside the hearth, the woman grunted approval and pressed a small piece of cornbread into her hand. It was not much, but it was a beginning. That evening, as the sun dipped below the trees and painted the world in amber and gold, Eliza stood at the edge of the river that bordered the camp. She held the bow Sonny had given her, though she hadn't yet learned to string it. She heard footsteps behind her and turned. Sonny approached with 2 arrows and a quiet nod, without a word. He took the bow from her hands, strung it, and handed it back. "Lesson 1, he said. "Breathe before you draw." She followed his instruction, mimicking his stance, trying not to feel the heat of his gaze on her posture. "Lesson 2, he added, moving closer, his hand briefly adjusting the tilt of her elbow. "Trust yourself, even if no one else does." She loosed the arrow. It landed a few feet shy of the target. She groaned. "I'm terrible." "You're beginning," he corrected. She looked at him, at the way the last light caught the lines of his face, at the steadiness in his eyes, at the strength in the way he stood beside her without asking for anything in return. For the first time in years, she felt like a woman, not a problem, not a debt, not a burden, just a woman learning how to breathe again. The first firelight of fall came earlier than Eliza expected. The golden Tennessee sun that had shimmered across the ridges now dipped behind the pines more quickly, drawing longer shadows across the camp. The chill in the air crept in slowly, like a memory you tried to forget but couldn't shake. Sonny had taken to returning later each day. He was busy with council meetings, scouting patrols, and preparation for winter. Tensions were rising with nearby settlers. And though Eliza never asked, she read the worry in his shoulders. He wore silence like a cloak, and though it shielded him from many, it only made Eliza more determined to see through it. She was learning how to help, how to listen, and perhaps hardest of all, how to be still. One morning, she woke before the sun. The lodge was quiet, the warmth of the fire just beginning to fade. She wrapped a fur around her shoulders and stepped outside, watching the mist curl across the grass like breath from the earth. It crossed the clearing. Smoke rose from the cooking huts. The women had already begun their morning routines, grinding maize, heating stones, preparing dyes and baskets. For days now, Eliza had watched from the edge. Today, she stepped closer. She approached an older woman named Waya, whose long gray braid reached the small of her back. Waya had never spoken to her directly, but neither had she joined the others in whispering. Eliza offered a gentle osio, a Cherokee greeting she had heard Sonny use. Waya raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Eliza gestured to the basket of corn beside the stone mortar and motioned as if to help. Waya grunted and pointed to a second stone bowl. Wordlessly, Eliza sat and began mimicking her motions: lift, dirt, drop, grind, turn, sweep, and arm. The rhythm was comforting, steady like a heartbeat. Hours passed. Others joined the circle, and Eliza said little, but her hands spoke. She ground corn, wove fiber, fetched water. Her dress was stained with dye by midday, her knees sore from kneeling, but something in her felt light, like she was earning her place one thread, one hushed smile at a time. Later that afternoon, Wyatt handed her a fresh woven sash dyed a soft green. She placed it in Eliza's lap and patted her hand once, firmly. Little red one. No words. No words, just a nod. It was the first gift she had received from anyone but Sonny. That evening, Eliza found herself sitting by the communal fire, among the others, without being asked to move. The circle was large elders. Children, warriors, women with babies on their hips. It was a space for stories, for song, for remembering, and for the first time, she was part of it. Sonny arrived just as the stars began to bloom. He found her seated beside a young girl who was braiding grass into a small doll. He stopped. The flicker in his eyes wasn't surprise. It was pride. You found your place. Where is Shelrenam, committee? He said as he sat beside her. I'm trying, she replied. Wyatt passed a bowl of warm stew down the circle. It stopped in Eliza's hands. She held it a moment, felt the weight of it, the meaning, and then took a spoonful and passed it along. I never thought, she began, I'd belong anywhere again. Sonny looked at her, the firelight dancing in the gold flecks of his eyes. You didn't find belonging, he said. You made it. They didn't speak for a long time after that. They didn't need to. That night, when Eliza lay on her bedroll, curled beneath woven blankets, she felt the memory of her old life begin to loosen its grip. She thought of the cabin she'd left behind, the judgmental stares of townsfolk, the hissed insults, the loneliness. She thought of her father's back as he walked away and never looked back. And she realized it wasn't her who had been cursed. It was them for their fear, their cruelty, their ignorance. However bruised, had survived. The next day brought wind, not just a breeze, but a wild, whistling storm rolling in from the hills, scattering leaves in spirals and sending animals skittering to burrows. Eliza stood outside the lodge, helping secure drying herbs under an awning. As she tied the last bundle, she caught movement on the ridge. A rider, galloping, faster. The cry went up from the watchman. Sonny emerged from the council lodge and met the rider halfway into camp. Eliza saw the urgency in their exchange, short bursts of Cherokee she didn't yet understand. But the tones were sharp. When Sonny turned and met her gaze across the clearing, her stomach clenched. He approached quickly. There's trouble? She asked. There's a white trader caravan, he said. They're demanding passage and one of them claims you were stolen. Her blood turned to ice. Who? Kayin Hassam. I don't know yet, Sani replied, but they carry official seals. I must speak with them before others do. She reached for his arm. I won't go back. I won't tisunum. His eyes locked on hers. You won't what we, he said simply. But their words have weight. And some in the camp still look for reasons to doubt you. Let me speak before fear decides. Minutes later, Eliza stood behind the lodge flap. Peeking through the seam, she watched as a man in a brown frock coat and riding boots dismounted near the edge of camp. He was tall, well-fed, pale with a sharp jaw and trimmed mustache. A slick, practiced confidence hung around him like a scent. This woman, Surdi Harnaden Tistermanpen, he said loudly, holding up a paper, was once a ward of the missionary settlement. She's gone missing. We believe she's been taken against her will by this man. He pointed to Sani. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the watching crowd. A few elders frowned. Some of the younger warriors exchanged glances. Sani stood still as stone. She is not missing. He said, she lives here. She walks among us by choice. She is under contract. The man insisted. She's bound to the settlement. And if she remains here, it will be seen as harboring a fugitive. At that, Eliza stepped forward. The wind tore at her skirt and tangled her hair. But she didn't flinch. She walked past the fire pit, past the stairs, past the man holding the paper. She stopped beside Sani and looked the envoy in the eye. I am not a fugitive, she said. I am not under contract, and I was not taken. I was given up, cast out by people who saw no value in me. This man didn't steal me. He sheltered me. The envoy's lips curled. You have no legal claim here. Eliza raised her voice. I make my own claim. And she turned not to him but to the gathered Cherokee, to Waya, to the children, Ishurikawanan, to the elders, to the warriors who had once whispered cursed behind her back. I live here. I work. I help. I breathe the same fire. Walk the same earth. If you say I don't belong, I'll leave. But not because he says so. There was a beat of silence. Then Waya stepped forward. She placed her old, weathered hand on Eliza's shoulder and said something in Cherokee that Eliza didn't understand, but the meaning was clear in the tone. The envoy glared. You'll regret this. Sani stepped forward then, his tone like iron wrapped in velvet. You mistake us, he said. We do not bow to threats, and we do not return what was never yours. The envoy turned and mounted his horse. Without another word, he galloped away, trailing dust behind him. That evening, the fire was warmer. What cern did he know cern? The circle was fuller, and when Sani handed Eliza a small carved medallion etched with the shape of a cedar tree symbol of endurance, he said only, this is not a reward. It is a recognition. She held it to her chest and nodded. That night, when she laid her head down beside the fire, she did not feel like a visitor anymore. She felt like part of something ancient, something alive, something chosen. Here is the rewritten and expanded version of Chapter 6. The river that ran between them, with rich emotional detail and vivid, cinematic storytelling, targeting approximately 1,600 words. Chapter 6. The river that ran between them. The sun sat low in the Tennessee sky, casting long, golden fingers across the hills and painting the river in hues of fire and honey. The air smelled of sweet grass and damp earth, a calm after the last week's turmoil. Yet beneath the peaceful veneer of the Cherokee camp, something unspoken lingered between Sani and Eliza, a quiet tension that neither the bird's song nor the river's murmur could dissolve. Eliza stood on a high slope just beyond the cooking fires, looking down at the winding river below. Her hair, now brushed and braided loosely down her back, caught the fading sunlight, glinting like strands of polished copper. She wore a simple cotton tunic given to her by one of the elder women, dyed the soft blue of wild chicory flowers, and the silver locket her mother had once worn glinted faintly at her chest. She fingered it absently now. Lost in thought, down by the river, Sani knelt, washing his hands in the cold current, his silhouette strong and steady against the light. He had said little since the confrontation in the council circle, where he had claimed her not as a possession, but under his protection. A man of few words, Sani's silence now cut deeper than any speech could have. Eliza didn't know if his quiet was rooted in duty, discomfort, or something else altogether. Her heart had shifted that day, when he had stood before his people and declared her under his shield. A strange flicker of hope had taken root in her chest, No one had ever claimed her safety before. No one had ever stood between her and the world's cruelty. But that day he had. Now, numb, her feelings twisted with confusion. Gratitude blurred into guilt. Guilt fermented into longing. And that longing so unfamiliar, so unwelcome, curled around her like a vine in bloom. "Eliza," came a voice behind her, soft and gravelly. She turned to see an elder woman, Nakasi, the midwife who had tended to her wounds weeks before, standing with a small bundle in her hands. "For you," Nakasi said in accented but clear English, offering a folded shawl woven with earthy reds and warm ochres. "Cold comes tonight? You not used to mountain chill?" Eliza took it, the soft fabric warm against her fingers. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely audible. Nokasi studied her for a moment, then glanced toward the river, Surdanonen Siramawem, where Sani now stood, drying his arms with a strip of cloth. "He is good man," Nokosi said quietly, but heart-locked. "Long time." Eliza's brows drew together. Nokosi hesitated, then said, "Los Tortillos Samanan Kimani." Deep loss. Before war, before white man's treaties, he had sister, Dashukanadurawan, killed by soldiers. Then a wife betrothed died of fever. Many moons ago, Eliza's breath caught. The ache in her chest deepened. She suddenly saw the warrior not just as a protector, but as a man carved by grief, a man with wounds not unlike her own. That night, the camp dined quietly on smoked venison and roasted squash. Sani sat a short distance away, his posture upright, his eyes distant as he listened to the older men share stories in Cherokee. Eliza sat beside Nkosi near the fire, wrapped in her new shawl. The heat soothed her, but her mind wandered to him, how his hands moved when he repaired tools, how his gaze flickered toward her when he thought she wasn't looking, how his quiet steadiness felt like a weight she both feared and wanted to lean into. Later, Skilsusurin, unable to sleep, Eliza wandered down to the river's edge. The moon had risen full and bright, turning the water silver. The trees whispered secrets only the wind understood. She knelt, dipping her hands into the current, watching the ripples fan out like questions. Behind her, footsteps. She didn't turn. She didn't have to. "You walk quiet," she murmured. "I've had practice," Sani replied, his voice low and steady. He stepped beside her, hands behind his back. The moonlight carved strong shadows across his face. For a long time, neither spoke. "I heard what Nokosi said," she finally whispered. "About your sister. You're betrothed." He nodded once. Slowly, "Samoshiturum. I'm sorry." "You do not have to be," he said, though there was no anger in his voice. It was a long time ago. But some rivers run beneath the ground, even when they seem gone. Eliza looked down at her reflection in the water. Her face looked different somehow, less like the girl who had ridden in a wagon of shame, more like someone forging herself anew. "I know what it means to lose everything," she said. "I was born different. My mother died young. My father," her voice caught. "He sold me for his own comfort." Sani's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. "I spent years believing I was cursed, that I wasn't worthy of being loved or chosen," she continued. "But lately, I'm starting to wonder if maybe the world was wrong about me." She looked up at him then, her eyes bright. "And about you?" He studied her, his eyes like coals beneath the moon's gaze. "Then we're not for never in anyone." Slowly, he knelt beside her. "I never asked for you to be brought here." He went in. "Submarina," he said, "I did not want a treaty sealed with a woman's life. I do not believe peace is made that way." She nodded. "I didn't ask to be traded like a token." He paused. "But you stayed. You did not run. Even when you could have." "I stayed because you gave me a place when I had none," she said. "Not because I was forced." A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of water and wind. Then Sani reached into his leather satchel and pulled something out, a thin flute, carved of dark walnut, etched with swirling lines. He handed it to her without a word. "I made this," he said. "It is not finished, but it is yours. If you want it, wash turn." Eliza took the flute into her hands. It was smooth and warm, as if it had been waiting for her. Her eyes welled, and she looked up at him. "Why me?" He shrugged lightly. "Because you listen. Because you do not pretend." The river shimmered between them. But suddenly, It didn't feel like a barrier. It felt like a bridge. When he stood then, when into Sherberfrin as Sibrintum. Holding out a hand, she hesitated only a moment, then placed her hand in his. He didn't kiss her, he didn't touch her more than necessary. But he walked with her all the way back to her tent. And for the first time, Eliza didn't feel like a stranger in someone else's world. She felt seen, denone, montre de marinton, held not by arms, but by the quiet strength of someone who understood the language of silence. That night, she slept with the flute cradled beside her heart. And in her dreams, she was not cursed. She was chosen. The early morning broke with a hush over the Cherokee camp, as if even the birds held their songs in reverence. Mist clung low across the valley floor, curling around the lodge posts and cedar trees like the memory of breath in cold air. A fire crackled low near the center of camp, casting dancing light across sleeping forms bundled in deer hide and wool. But in Sani's lodge, Eliza was already awake, her eyes fixed on the embroidered seam of the ceiling above her. She hadn't slept. Not really. Her fingers curled against the soft fur beneath her as the voices of the night echoed faintly in her ears. Sani's quiet words, the murmurs of the council, the accusing stares. And now, Isawao, the question that would not leave her mind. What would she do when her past came riding up the trail? The council had spoken the night before. The vote was not unanimous, but it was clear enough. She would be allowed to stay, for now, but she was not yet one of them. The old women, the mothers, the widows, they had held their silence. Only Sani's voice had truly stood in her defense. Outside, the sound of children laughing chased away the quiet dread. Life went on. She realized this tribe lived through fire, rain, sorrow, and ceremony. They woke to hunt, to weave, to teach, to love, to endure. And now was Shuri, Wakanawo. She was part of that tapestry, whether or not the thread matched in color or strength. Eliza rose slowly, brushing her skirt smooth, her hands still trembling slightly. She stepped outside just as Sani returned from the morning scout. He spotted her instantly and gave a small nod. There was no hesitation in his movement, no pause in his expression, as if the judgment of others rolled off him like water on stone. He walked directly to her, tall and steady, and offered her a cup of water. She took it with quiet gratitude. Sleep didn't come, she said, her voice low, almost guilty. Sani looked out toward the mist-wrapped forest. No one to me. It doesn't, when you wait for storms. She glanced at him. Are we waiting for a storm? He turned to her fully, his dark eyes unwavering. We are always between storms, but not all storms break things. Some wash what needed cleansing. The words settled over her like a blanket. They ate together near the fire. Simple bread and venison from the night before, spiced with roots and wild herbs, as she chewed. Her eyes followed the rhythm of the tribe, the women boiling dye in iron pots, children racing along the ridge. Idnaprun sordu kemen panason. The elder men sharpening spears and adjusting bindings. But something had changed, a shift. Some of the looks she received now held something different, not warmth, not acceptance, but wary curiosity, as if the people now watched her not for failure, but for proof that she could belong, that she had not cursed the earth beneath her. That Sani had not been wrong to speak for her. As if summoned by the thought, an elder approached. Nayahi, she was small, her back curved like the bow she once carried as a girl, her hands wrinkled but strong. She did not speak at first. Instead, she handed Eliza a bundle of dried cedar and pointed to the dye pit. The message was simple. You want to be one of us? Come help. Eliza followed. For hours, she worked beside the other women. They did not speak much, but slowly, as her fingers turned purple with crushed berries and her apron grew stained with effort, something shifted in their silence. One woman passed her a cool cloth for her brow. Another adjusted her elbow gently, correcting her motion. By midday, Eliza was laughing softly with them, surprised by her own voice. Sani watched from a distance, arms crossed loosely as he stood beside the council lodge. He didn't approach. He didn't interfere, but his eyes dark, serious. Proud never left her. That night, the sky turned the color of steel. Dark clouds rolled over the ridgeline, heavy with the scent of rain and ash. Thunder growled low like some ancient beast in its den. Sani summoned her before the fire. The entire camp had gathered, not for judgment, not for punishment, but for a rite. Could Winuana one for Devon Honeymoon, a chance for Eliza to claim her place. It was not ceremonial in the way of white towns with judges and papers and rings. No, here, it was a ritual of voice and courage. She was asked to speak, to stand in the center of the fire ring and tell her story. Eliza's knees threatened to buckle, but she stepped forward. She stood beneath the watching eyes of men, women, warriors, Tujwan, Asir, children. The sky roared once, the wind whipping her dress against her legs. Still, as she did not run. My name is Eliza Morgan, she began, her voice rough from nerves. I come from a town that called me cursed. I was born with the blood of their enemies and the silence of their shame. My mother died giving me life. My father raised me with fists and fear. And when he no longer wanted me, he gave me to men who sold me, passed me like coin. A low murmur stirred. But I am not a curse. She continued, eyes rising. I am not what they said. I survived. I endured. And when I was cast into the forest like an animal, Sani found me. He gave me water. He gave me space. He gave me no chains, only choice. She turned to look at him. He stood at the edge of the firelight, arms at his sides, eyes like storm clouds, dark but steady. I choose to stay, Eliza said, turning back to the tribe, not to hide, not to steal from your hearth, but to live. But didn't know one. To give her wefuri, to have her matter, to belong. Silence followed. Then Nayahi rose slowly. Her voice cracked with age but held the weight of mountains. She has spoken with truth. Let truth be her shield. Others nodded. One warrior stepped forward and dropped a handful of red clay into her palm, a symbol of soil accepted. Another tied a string of shell beads around her wrist, a symbol of community. Sani stepped last. He approached quietly, holding a small wooden medallion shaped like a mountain ridge. He placed it in her hand. This is for the storms, he said softly. So you remember they are not just to fear, but to survive. As the fire blazed, the rain finally broke. The heavens opened with a roar, drenching the camp in sheets of silver. But no one ran. No one screamed. The people stood together, shoulders pressed close, letting the storm soak them. Eliza tilted her face to the sky, eyes closed, breath deep. And for the first time since she could remember, she did not flinch from the thunder. That night, back in the lodge, Sani brought her warm blankets and a bowl of sweetened root tea. They didn't speak much. The rain said enough. But before sleep took her, she whispered, "Thank you for giving me the chance." Sani knelt beside her, gaze gentle. "You gave yourself the chance," he said. "All I did was stand beside you when you took it." She smiled. "Not for Waidamon, Surito. Not bright, but real." And in the rhythm of the falling rain, Eliza dreamed not of running, not of fear, but of mountains steady in the storm. The seasons shifted slowly in the hills of the Tennessee Territory. By late October, the wind carried a bite and the trees stood like old ghosts, cloaked in russet, gold, and dying green. Smoke curled steadily from the lodges each morning, and the sun rose later with each passing day. Life in the Cherokee camp had settled into rhythm again: hunts, Cherished, surdy harvests, laughter, and quiet songs sung around the fire. And within that rhythm, Eliza found her place. It was not a dramatic transformation. There was no horn blown, no final decree shouted over the hills. Rather, it happened in small, meaningful ways, her hands learning to weave, her voice joining the women in stories, her steps no longer hesitant as she passed between the lodges. Children no longer stared. Elders nodded with recognition, and the warriors who once questioned her presence now offered greetings in their native tongue, short, clipped but genuine. She was no longer the outsider. Still, something lingered in the air like an unfinished note. Eliza felt it when she stood at the river's edge each dawn, brushing her hair in the reflection of the cold, slow-moving water. She saw it in the tension of Sani's jaw as he met with the scouts each evening. Something was coming. She could feel it like a storm far off, visible only in the way the animals quieted and the air held its breath. One morning, the feeling came to life. The scout named Waya arrived on horseback, sweat lathered on his mount, a red scarf tied around his arm, a signal of urgency. Sani met him at the edge of camp. They exchanged words too fast for Eliza to catch. But the meaning was clear. Riders were coming. From the east. Surmenawati di Torrenton. From her old world. From the place where she had been cursed and branded. The white settlement of Marybelle had learned she was alive and well. And worse that she now lived freely among the Cherokee. Sani gathered the council quickly. Eliza watched from afar, heart pounding like a drum inside her chest. When he finally approached her, his face was grim but not afraid. "They're not coming to ask questions," he said quietly. "They're coming to take—" Eliza's breath caught. Take who? Sani didn't need to answer. She already knew. Her. They would not tolerate a woman who defied their labels. They would not allow her to be claimed by another people, least of all a tribe they once drove westward with fire and steel. And they would never accept the idea that the cursed, barren girl had built a life far richer than anything they'd given her. I'll leave, she said at once. I won't bring war to your camp. I can go into the hills, disappear. But Sani shook his head. This is your home now. You will not run from it. They'll say I bewitched you, she whispered, that I've poisoned the minds of your people. They've said worse. None of us would have been tornado, and we've survived worse. But if they bring guns, then we show them our strength does not depend on silence. His voice was firm, but beneath it, she could feel something breakable. The fear wasn't for himself. It was for her, for what he might lose. Preparations began. The warriors checked their bows, loaded their rifles with care, whispered to the dogs. The women brought herbs for wounds, carved bone needles, boiled water, surmana sornish for an bidwan. Eliza moved through it all, like someone floating above her body. She had been ready to fight for survival once, when she had been alone. Wounded, nothing but skin and fear. But now, the stakes were different. This wasn't just about surviving. It was about protecting the place that had finally welcomed her. That night, Eliza sat by the fire with Sani. Neither spoke for a long time. The stars were bright, unblinking. When they come, she finally said, don't let them hurt you for me. He turned to her slowly. They will not touch me, he said, because they will not get past you. Eliza's eyes stung. She reached into her satchel and pulled out the medallion he had given her, the carved mountain ridge. She wore it always. But tonight, she clutched it tighter than ever. I was nothing when I came here, she whispered. He smiled faintly. You were never nothing. You were just buried, and you uncovered me. Nanya. I simply sat beside you until you remembered how to breathe. Tears broke over her lashes. She laughed through them. That's a good line. Sani leaned close. Then remember it. Remember it. They came with the dawn, 5 riders, coats like ash, rifles slung across their backs, and hats low over their brows. The leader was a man Eliza knew well, Sheriff Amos Carter. He'd been the one to drag her from the church porch when her father accused her of witchcraft. He'd been the one to spit at her feet when she cried out in court. And now, he looked older but no less cruel. He dismounted with the practiced arrogance of a man who believed the land owed him obedience. We've come for the girl, he said, voice flat. Sani stood beside Eliza, arms crossed. She is not a girl, he replied, and she is not yours. The sheriff stepped closer. She's a citizen of Marybelle, a known troublemaker, a consort to criminals. She is my wife. A silence fell over the camp. Eliza's breath hitched. They had not spoken the words aloud before, not in ceremony, not in secret, but now, here, in front of lawmen and elders and spirits of the land. Sani declared it. The sheriff blinked. That's so. She lives under my roof, wears my name, and carries my trust. That makes her kin to every man, woman, and child in this camp. You'll take her over all our bodies. Amos Carter smirked. We'll see. He reached for his rifle. Eliza moved before she could think. She stepped forward. Between Sani and the lawman. No, Nasanaku. Her voice rang out like a struck bell. You want to drag me back? Then say it. Say you want to destroy what you never understood. Say you hate me because I didn't die when you threw me out. Carter frowned. You think you belong here? You don't. You're an abomination. Eliza met his gaze. Then let me be one. But I won't crawl for you. I won't beg. I won't break again. Behind her, Sani drew his blade, but he did not raise it, because something else was happening. The warriors stepped forward shoulder to shoulder. The women stood behind them, arms folded, some holding their children's hands. Elders emerged from their lodges. Nayehi stood at the front, chin raised. One of the sheriff's men whispered, "We didn't come for a war," Carter growled. We came to make a point, and you have re-west been," Sani said calmly. "You showed us yours. Now leave before we show you ours." A long moment passed. Then Carter spat into the dust. "This ain't over, just one. But he turned and rode away. The others followed, quiet as ghosts. When they disappeared over the ridge, the camp did not cheer. They simply returned to life. But something fundamental had changed. Eliza turned to Sani. Her knees buckled. He caught her. "Merda de one gawkit. Is it real now?" she asked, breathless. He brushed her hair back gently. It was always real, but now the world knows. That night, they did something simple but sacred. They gathered the camp near the cedar grove and placed a small table between them. Upon it, they laid a piece of dyed cloth half woven by Eliza, half by Nayehi, a symbol of two threads, joined in mekrawas soernaftorten. They bound their wrists with red string, burned sage, and poured water from two separate gourds into a single clay bowl. No one spoke the words of a priest, but all present felt it. She had not just been chosen, she had chosen. In the weeks that followed, Eliza's steps grew lighter. Her laughter came quicker. The children began calling her Waia'aki Wolf Woman for her quiet strength and fierce protection. She stitched her own dresses, now Cherokee patterns and frontier practicality blended. She hunted. She healed. She sang lullabies to the youngest ones. And one day, as the sun bathed the riverbank in gold, she took Sani's hand and pressed it to her belly. His eyes widened. She nodded, smiling through tears. "A life, Iri Musamist," she whispered. "Real life." And he pulled her close, forehead against hers. Not a curse, not a burden, but a beginning. Beneath the same sky that once tried to bury her, Eliza bloomed, no longer afraid, no longer alone. She had been given away. But in the end, she had been chosen,